Want to reclaim your personal data, protecting you from identity thefts, hacks, or worse? Then try Incogni and get a 60% discount on an annual subscription when you use offer code SKILLUP at incogni.com/skillup. Click below to get started or stick around to the end of the video to learn more.
Monster Hunter Stories 3 is peak Monster Hunter. I know that's quite a claim, but before I explain myself, let me start this review with two disclaimers. Number one, this review will be mostly spoiler-free. There'll be no story spoilers here, and I've done my best to avoid showing too many of the monsters and environments that you haven't seen in trailers. Number two, I have not played the prior Monster Hunter Stories games, so if you're looking for straight comparisons, you're unlikely to find that here. What I will say though is, if you did play those games, I think it's highly unlikely that you will not love Monster Hunter Stories 3 just as much as I did, given the reception to the free demo and for all the things I touch on in this review. While I haven't played the Stories games before, I do consider myself a fan of this franchise. Monster Hunter Freedom Unite on the PSP was one of the earliest games I became totally obsessed with, but Monster Hunter World, man, that set a new high watermark for this franchise. I put like 500 hours into that thing between PC and console. Just an incredible game in its mechanics, its visuals, its wealth of content. I figured it'd be a long time before Capcom could ever top that entry, and that turned out to be true, for me anyway. Monster Hunter Rise was fine, as was Monster Hunter Wilds, but they didn't quite reignite my love for this franchise the way that Monster Hunter World did. Ended up dropping both of them after 20 hours or so. Did not expect the JRPG spin-off series to be the one to do that, but here we are. So I say again, I think Monster Hunter Stories 3 is actually peak Monster Hunter. I rolled credits after just over 60 hours, and I loved every minute of this. To the people like me, fans of Monster Hunter that have never touched these Stories games, let me assure you that basically all of the things that you love about Monster Hunter are here. The combat perfectly captures the depth and spectacle of its action counterpart, working hand in hand with itemization to form that compelling, tried and tested loop. And the monsters, oh man, this game is like a greatest hits of the sickest monsters across the entire franchise, requiring much the same amount of preparation and quick thinking to overcome. But importantly, it also breaks away from the franchise in all the right ways. The stylized visuals are gorgeous, its technical state is near flawless on PC, and its story is actually great. This is the first Monster Hunter game where I found myself actually invested in this world beyond just the monsters and the hunting. Another reason I think Monster Hunter Stories 3 is so peak is that so much of it is inviting to those even outside the Monster Hunter sphere. For fans of games like Pokemon, you're in for a real treat here, as the monster collecting is so addictive and customizable and rewarding. For JRPG fans, you'll find impeccably well-designed turn-based combat, a meaty, uplifting story with endearing companions, and an absolutely S-tier soundtrack that goes toe-to-toe with the best in this genre, which is no easy feat. But even if you aren't a fan of any of these things that I've mentioned, Monster Hunter, Pokemon, JRPGs, whatever, I think everything that Monster Hunter Stories 3 is doing is so good, so expertly crafted, that it's hard to imagine anyone that would not get a kick out of this. I, for one, have been hopelessly addicted to this thing, and I intend to spend many more hours with it owing to its breadth, depth, and polish. I really thought I'd have to wait until at least the next mainline entry to feel this way about Monster Hunter again, but thankfully Monster Hunter Stories 3 has cut that wait short, and I now hold the belief that this spin-off series ought to be just as much of a hit as the mainline games are. I'll start by saying that you don't need to have played Stories 1 and 2 to jump into this third entry, or at least I didn't feel like I was missing any crucial context. This is set 200 years after the prior game, in an era where the world is suffering a strange phenomenon known simply as the encroachment, which crystallizes everything and everyone it touches. This has caused conflict between two kingdoms. One, Vermeil, has been completely debilitated by its effects, starved of food and suffering a deadly rain. The other, Azuria, is seemingly safe and sound, turning a blind eye to their neighbors' plights and the disaster slowly creeping in from beyond the wall. You play as the heir to Azuria's throne, but you're not just royalty, you're also a ranger, a title given to those dedicated to the preservation of monsters, one of which, a once thought to be extinct Rathalos, has been by your side since childhood, born alongside a twin, which is apparently bad news. And after a series of events, your mother vanished with the sibling, never to be seen again. So, 2 kingdoms, 2 Rathalos, a crystalline disaster, and a missing mother. You might be wondering, where's the big monster I have to kill? This is a Monster Hunter game after all. Rest assured that does of course come into play later, but what surprised me most about Monster Hunter Stories 3 was just how invested I was into everything leading up to that. I could not care less about stories that revolve around the end of the world if I do not care about the world or the people living in it, as has been the case with prior Monster Hunter games. But Monster Hunter Stories 3 is the first game in this franchise where I've genuinely felt attached to those things. Part of that's to do with the personal stakes set up by its intriguing political and familial drama, and the relatively well-told inner conflict of the protagonist who finds themselves torn between 2 worlds, having to juggle his responsibilities as the sole heir to the throne, but at the same time trying to protect the monsters that everyone seems so willing to turn into war machines. It's also thanks to the memorable surrounding characters, each so distinct in their design and personalities, not least of which are your close ranger companions. My favorite was mum of the group, Cora, for reasons. Each of them have companion quest lines as well, which help you get to know them a little bit more. This may be the only place in the game where I have some gripes, in that each companion quest follows a pretty strict formula. Eleanor, for example, will always have you collecting 3 materials so she can cook a new meal. Cora will always have you going into some cave, etc. It's fitting with the characters, of course, and the context is a little different each time, but I would have liked at least a little variation here. I also think it's kind of awkward that for each step in these quests you get all of them at once. Makes you feel like you've got to pause the main story to do some busy work before continuing, since you do want to be doing these for their impactful unlocks. But I digress. All in all, there's a fun 60+ hour globe-trotting adventure here with some interesting conflicts, mysteries, and heartwarming companionship, and a satisfying conclusion where all these threads converge. I don't want to oversell it, like the story's not going to change your life or anything, and it isn't particularly subtle about its themes, but it'll definitely make you feel things, which is, again, certainly a lot more than I can say for the mainline games. It's sometimes goofy, sometimes tragic, interspersed with these incredible cinematic moments where the orchestral score swells with the animation to create moments so uplifting and so damn hype it'll make your hair stand on end. But above all, it got me invested in the world of Monster Hunter in a way that I frankly never expected I would. A world that is a joy to explore, might I add. It's divided up into modestly sized zones that each feel quite different to traverse on your monsties. That's the name given to your tamed monsters, which I'll admit sounds kind of weird now that the game's a little more grown up. Anyway, the first zone, for example, is made up of wide, lush fields and a huge body of water in the middle. So nothing too demanding there, but you'll need to get your hands on an aquatic monstie to get the most out of it. The second zone, by comparison, is quite a different beast. Far more verticality here, with an enormous mountain range that's going to make full use of your climbing monsties and platforming skills. It's also a world that's rather easy on the eyes. I think this game looks absolutely stunning. It is obviously a significant jump in visual fidelity versus the prior games. No surprise there, I guess, since this one isn't built with the original Switch in mind. But yeah, this stylized rendition of the Monster Hunter world is so sharp, so vibrant. The colors pop from the screen at all times, and you'll see that full spectrum of color leveraged as you explore each of the game zones. Furthermore, it runs beautifully. I mostly played this on my PC with an RTX 4080 Super. That's of course overkill for a game with this art style, but I was getting over like 200 FPS with DLSS off, so that much headroom gives me confidence that this thing will run pretty well on mid to lower end hardware. I can kind of attest to that too, since I played like 10 hours of this thing on my Steam Deck, where on low settings with AMD FSR on, I could cap it at that golden 45 FPS, and it rarely dipped below that. So not perfect, but more than playable on a device with a screen that size, and the game still looks fantastic. When it comes to consoles, the base PS5 has this running at a rock solid 60 FPS on performance mode, dips slightly below that on balance. On quality mode, you will be getting 30 FPS. Switch 2 performance is a bit iffy though. Based on my time with the demo, it looks to be hovering between 30 and 45 FPS with a lot of fluctuation and no option to cap it, so that is a shame. But like I said, playing on PC or PS5, performance is fantastic, and the same can be said of the game's overall technical state. In 60 hours, I experienced 0 bugs, 0 crashes, nothing. For me, this was a technically flawless, uncompromised experience, which is increasingly rare these days. Absolutely love to see it. So the story is fantastic, as is the world design, the art, the music, the technical polish. That's all well and good, but we haven't even gotten to the meat and potatoes, the combat, which is just phenomenal.
Nice.
Alright, so much of what I'm about to glaze here probably won't be new to you if you've played the prior entries, since as far as I can tell, not too much has changed here, but also, no need to fix what's not broken. For those who haven't, I'll say definitely don't write Monster Hunter Stories 3 off if you're not a fan of turn-based combat. Because honestly, I consider myself among you. Expedition 33 was really the only turn-based combat that's clicked for me, and after that, I went around hunting for another game to satiate my newfound appetite for it. I tried Persona 3, Persona 5, Metaphor, I even resorted to trying gacha games like Honkai Star Rail, but none of them were really doing much for me. They weren't quite giving me the combination of spectacle and mechanical depth that Expedition 33 did, or at least not in the early hours. There's every chance I just didn't stick with them long enough for that to come through. Enter Monster Hunter Stories 3, which got its hooks in from the very first battle and has quickly become my favorite turn-based combat right next to Expedition 33 for much the same reasons. What immediately struck me is the presentation of it. I've already spoken about the game's slick art style, but the amount of effort that's also gone into the animations is similarly impressive. There's all the unique animations of the weapons that reflect their movesets in the mainline games, only here given a new level of stylishness. Similarly, there's the monsters. Every one of their abilities are attached to animations unique to them. They change posture when they're injured or enraged. Pokemon could never. But the coup de grace really are those kinship abilities. As you fight alongside your monstie, you build up a meter that, when filled, allows you to ride them in combat. At such time, you can choose to unleash a sort of ultimate ability. Again, this is entirely unique to every single monster in the game. They are just hype incarnate. I mean, just watch. It's also again worth mentioning the music here. I feel like Monster Hunter has always had really great themes for its monsters, but the music's typically quite hard to pay attention to when you're sweating your ass off trying to stay alive. Here though, there's time enough for that music to ring loud and clear, and like the animations, make every encounter feel so fucking epic. But better than how the combat looks and sounds is how it plays. The combat mechanics of the mainline games have been so perfectly translated into turn-based combat that if you hadn't played the mainline games before, you'd think Monster Hunter was always a turn-based game. There are 6 weapon types available: greatsword, longsword, hammer, hunting horn, bow, and gun lance, and each of them function in much the same ways they do in the mainline games. For example, longsword builds up a gauge to maintain a power boost or expend on big attacks, whereas the bow swaps between different arrows to inflict status effects. But even the flow of combat has made a seamless transition here. You're finding the right moment to chug consumables, you're thinking about elemental weaknesses and targeting specific monster parts with the right weapon for maximum breakage, where breaking apart can stun them or knock them down, allowing your entire party to wail on them.
Now!
But even the more subtle Monster Hunter mechanics manage to emerge from all this, like timing those part breaks so that a hard-hitting attack might be interrupted, or using a flash bomb to instantly ground a flying monster. Most of these things aren't tutorialized, you just find them through experimentation. Finally, there's also the scissors paper rock mechanic that's been a staple of the story's games, where a monster might target you with a specific attack type, power, speed, or technique. Directly countering them with the right attack type allows you to deal more damage and take less. That also works the other way around. What I think is really cool about this is that their attack type isn't catalogued anywhere. Again, you just have to experiment and then hold that knowledge in your mind once you've figured it out. And you've got to do this for tons of monsters, and all of this can change when they enter a new phase, causing you to adjust accordingly. As someone with the memory of a goldfish, this led to many super intense moments where I'd be on my last legs and the final blow would come down to whether I guessed right on that clash. Just awesome stuff. Keep in mind you're also coordinating all of this with your monstie and your AI companion, who also has their own monstie. There's just so much to keep track of at any given time, and I mean that in the best possible way. The game's tightly tuned difficulty requires you to engage with all these systems. Like, I regularly needed to change up my entire build for a single boss fight, use every consumable at my disposal, and every bit of game knowledge I'd accrued up to that point. just the way I like it, to be honest with you. And then I'd be asked to develop even more niche strategies when I came face to face with invasive monsters. These are new to Monster Hunter Stories 3. I won't go too much into these to avoid spoilers, but basically these fights revolve around more bespoke mechanics, like using a specific weapon ability at a specific time, or ensuring a certain buff is active to counter one of their attacks. Things you'll only get slight hints for after picking up clues nearby. Again, I loved how these encounters ask you to completely rethink how you fight, and in fact some of these encounters actually taught me things that became vital in the game's challenging final hours. Just in case you still aren't convinced at the depth of this combat system, I'll end with this. There are players who are able to kill level 70 monsters in the game's free demo where you are capped out at level 10. As someone who is currently struggling on those level 70 bosses just 5 levels under, I have no idea how they did this, but the fact that players are able to pull off incredible feats like that should give you an idea of just how robust this combat system is. So the combat is top class, but I haven't even mentioned the expansive buildcraft that accompanies it. As you can expect from a Monster Hunter game, every monster you kill unlocks a new armor and weapon set to craft. They all look awesome, and the armor can be freely dyed and transmogged. Each armor set has its own passive abilities, and weapons house both active and passive abilities. Both armor and weapons can also be slotted with gems for extra abilities. But of course, alongside all of that, you're also managing your party of monsters. This is where we get into the creature collecting stuff, and man, this whole side of the game got its claws into me in a way that I did not expect, pardon the pun. Around the world, you'll find monster dens. They can show up as silver, gold, or diamond rarity. The higher the rarity, the greater the chance for higher rarity eggs, which hatch monsters with higher ranking abilities. Here's the thing though, your monsters are not stuck with the abilities they are born with, so you're not forced to re-level the same monster should you catch a better one. A mechanic called the Rite of Channeling returns from the prior games, allowing you to basically gene splice monsters, swapping the abilities of one with another, and aligning elements and attack types activates a bingo bonus, which gives you further stat boosts. Notably though, in Monster Hunter Stories 3, this process does not destroy the other monster, which is great since it allows for endless experimentation, and yeah, probably makes more sense given this is a game all about environmentalism. There are really no limits to this system, by the way. You can straight up put water abilities on a fire monstie if you want to, and in fact in some cases you're encouraged to do so to activate environmental abilities, which are a whole other thing we'll come back to. So what if I've got my monstie maxed out? What do I do with the duplicates? Is there any point to hatching more of them? The answer is yes, owing to another brilliant new system added to Monster Hunter Stories 3, habitat restoration. You can release monsters into areas of the world, provided you've dispatched the feral monster roaming that area. Not only does that mean that there are more of them in the world to hunt for materials, but boosting their population rank allows new eggs to be born with extra unique egg abilities, alongside those environmental skills, which are extra powerful passives that awaken with specific genes. So that's where you might give a monstie an ability or two that doesn't directly correlate with their element. But believe it or not, it goes even deeper than that. Boosting a monster's population enough also opens up the chance to hatch dual element monsties depending on the zone. So for example, Tobi Kadachi is a lightning monster, but I could get one that's both lightning and fire if I released enough of them into a fire aligned biome. Furthermore, there are extra hidden variants of monsters that can be hatched if you put them in biomes alongside specific other monsters. So yeah, between your monsties and your gear, there are just so many ways you can piece together synergistic builds. I can easily see myself pouring so many more hours into this game trying to collect all the monstie variants and to max out their power as well as that of my gear. On that note, I'll briefly touch on the endgame. Unfortunately, Monster Hunter Stories 3, unlike the prior entry, does not have any multiplayer. There are no co-op dens, nor PvP, so that is a shame and does somewhat dull the replayability of it. Still, I do think there's more than enough here to get your money's worth. As I said, it took me over 60 hours to get through the main campaign, but there are a dozen or so endgame monsters that I've barely managed to make a dent in, so I've got plenty more work ahead of me to upgrade my gear and max out my monsties, which means a hell of a lot more monster hunting. And with combat and buildcraft as good as this, that's totally fine by me. So that is Monster Hunter Stories 3. In summary, I think it's got easily the most interesting, most satisfying story in this franchise, with many moments of absolute peak. in part owing to its presentation and its music, which are also peak. The turn-based combat is so peak it'll sway even those who aren't typically into that, and it's bolstered by the rich buildcraft and creature collecting, which too are peak. I think what really makes this special though is something that's a little trickier to quantify and make definitive statements on, but it's the care that's been put into this thing. It sounds a touch dramatic, but it's true. There's a level of care here that's just emanating from every part of this game. It exists in all those things that I've already spoken about, but it's also in subtle things like the pleasant sound design, its intuitive UI, the taut item economy, but perhaps most importantly, it's present in this game's cohesion. It's difficult to spell out without really getting into the weeds, but you'll know what I mean when you play it. This game is just so expertly crafted. The combat, buildcraft, creature collecting, exploration, side quests, and new additions like the companion quests, habitat restoration, invasive monsters, and even its narrative. Each of these elements feed back into one or multiple others, forming this tightly constructed, closed ecosystem, you might say. Put another way, nothing in Monster Hunter Stories 3 feels wasteful or superfluous. They all work in perfect harmony to service this greater vision of a Monster Hunter that might be more than its monster hunting, and in that, they have undoubtedly succeeded. As such, I firmly believe that this game sits alongside Monster Hunter World as the peak of this franchise and a brilliant RPG in its own right. I strongly recommend Monster Hunter Stories 3.
Let 2026 be the year that you invest in a safer online presence with this video sponsor, Incogni, who are specialists in helping you reclaim your online data in order to protect you from identity thefts, hacks, or worse. Removing your data from as many corners of the internet as you can may seem like a no-brainer, but it can be a relentless and exhausting process to try and bargain with companies to take your data down. That's where Incogni comes in. You sign up, you enter your details, you grant it the required permissions, and after that, Incogni does all the work for you, sending out hundreds of automated requests to reclaim your data. Incogni has sent out over 177 requests on my behalf, which has resulted in my data being taken down from 171 sites. 171. I had absolutely no idea that 171 sites even had my data. Now, thankfully, they don't, thanks to Incogni. If I was to have submitted all these requests myself, doing all the paperwork and back and forth, it would have taken me around 128 hours, making Incogni incredibly well priced given how much value it delivers. Also, since data can reappear on sites where it's already been taken down, Incogni will circle back and repeatedly remove it for you, saving you even more time and energy. Incogni doesn't stop there though. Have you ever searched yourself on Google? We've all done it, but the amount of personal information publicly available that surfaces when you do it is staggering and adds another layer of online vulnerability. Incogni offers a custom removal option where you can tell it to remove your personal data from specific entities that may not be included in Incogni's automated removal process. Some exclusions apply here, but it does give you more control over your personal data. It's super easy, super effective, and best of all, super affordable. You can use offer code SKILLUP at incogni.com/skillup to get 60% off an annual subscription. Take your personal data back and get a 60% discount while doing it by visiting incogni.com/skillup and using offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Thanks Incogni for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.